The crack of lightning illuminated Tabitha Morgan's weathered face as she huddled in the corner of her dilapidated cabin, the storm outside mirroring the tempest within her heart. She had buried her husband Samuel just 3 weeks ago, leaving her alone on their small homestead in Wyoming Territory, 1875, a time when being a solitary woman on the frontier meant vulnerability and uncertainty. Rain pounded mercilessly against the roof, finding new paths through worsening leaks. Each drip echoed through the cabin like the ticking of a clock counting down to an inevitable end. Tabitha wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, her dark hair falling in loose strands around her face as she stared at the flickering candle, her only companion in the gathering darkness. "Samuel," she whispered to the empty room, "what am I to do now?" The howling wind carried away her words as if in answer, rattling the shutters violently. The homestead that had once represented their dreams now felt like a prison of memories. At 29, Tabitha was neither young enough to start fresh nor old enough to surrender to solitude. She moved to place a pot beneath a particularly persistent leak when a thunderous knocking at her door nearly stopped her heart. Visitors were rare in fair weather. In a storm like this, they were unheard of. Tabitha reached for the rifle Samuel had taught her to use and approached the door cautiously. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice stronger than she felt. "Madam, forgive the intrusion." The voice was deep, carried by the wind. "I was passing through when the storm hit. My horse is about spent and I saw your light. I mean no harm, just seeking shelter till this passes." Tabitha hesitated, the gun steady in her hands. Frontier hospitality dictated she offer refuge, but prudence warned against trusting strangers. "I can wait in your barn if that's more comfortable for you, madam," the voice added. Something in his tone, respect, perhaps, or genuine weariness, made her decision. Tabitha unlatched the door and opened it just enough to see the figure standing on her porch. The man was tall, drenched from the rain, with broad shoulders and a cowboy hat pulled low over his eyes. Water streamed down his duster as lightning flashed again, illuminating features that were handsome despite their exhaustion. "You can come in," she said finally, stepping back but keeping the rifle visible. "But I'll be keeping this close." The man nodded in understanding as he stepped inside, removing his hat to reveal dark hair and striking blue eyes. "Much obliged, madam. Xavier Jackson at your service." He remained near the door, respecting her caution. "I don't mean to impose, just needed a respite from that biblical deluge." Tabitha gestured toward a chair by the fire. "You can warm yourself there, Mr. Jackson. I'm Tabitha Morgan." "Mrs. Morgan," he acknowledged with a nod, noticing the wedding band on her finger. "Is your husband at home?" A shadow crossed her face. "My husband is dead, Mr. Jackson." 3 weeks now. Xavier removed his soaked duster, hanging it carefully near the door. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Morgan." His words weren't mere politeness, they carried genuine sympathy. "It's not right for anyone to face such times alone." Tabitha lowered the rifle slightly but kept it within reach. "We don't always get what's right in this life, Mr. Jackson. Please sit." As Xavier moved to the fire, Tabitha noticed his slight limp. His clothes, though travel-worn, were of good quality. Not a drifter then, but not wealthy either. "A working man, perhaps a ranch hand, or you're bleeding," she observed, noticing a dark stain on his shirt sleeve. Xavier glanced down with mild surprise. "Must have caught it on something during the ride. It's nothing." "Let me see it," Tabitha said, her tone allowing no argument. Years of frontier life had taught her that nothing could quickly become something deadly without proper care. With reluctance, Xavier rolled up his sleeve, revealing a nasty gash. "Probably happened when my horse spooked at the lightning. Ran us under some low branches." Tabitha set aside the rifle and fetched her medical supplies, herbs, bandages, and whiskey Samuel had traded for last winter. As she cleaned the wound, she couldn't help but notice the collection of scars that already marked his tanned skin. "You've seen your share of trouble, Mr. Jackson." A small smile played at his lips. "Just lived a full life, Mrs. Morgan." And what brings that full life to my doorstep in the middle of nowhere, during the worst storm we've had this season? Xavier winced slightly as she applied the whiskey to his wound. I'm heading to Sweetwater. Taking a job at the Carson Ranch. That's still 30 miles north, Tabitha observed, wrapping his arm with practiced efficiency. Hence my gratitude for your hospitality. I'd likely be face down in a gulch somewhere if not for your light. His eyes met hers with unwavering honesty. I promise you'll have no trouble from me. At first light, I'll be on my way. The cabin creaked ominously as a violent gust of wind battered the structure. One of the shutters tore loose, banging against the wall as rain began to pour through the window. Damn it all. Tabitha exclaimed, rushing to the window. Xavier was on his feet instantly. Let me. Without waiting for permission, he moved to the window, bracing against the wind to secure the shutter. Rain soaked him again, but he worked quickly, using a piece of leather cord from his pocket to fasten the shutter closed. When he turned back to her, water dripping from his face, Tabitha felt something unexpected gratitude for a strong presence in her home again. Thank you, she said simply. That's just a temporary fix. Come morning, I can properly repair it before I leave. He glanced around the cabin, noting other signs of disrepair. Seems like there's more than one thing needing attention around here. Tabitha's pride flared. I can manage my own home, Mr. Jackson. He held up his hands in a peace gesture. I'm sure you can, Mrs. Morgan, but even the most capable people sometimes appreciate an extra pair of hands. He paused, then added softly, I imagine your husband would want someone to help if only for a day. The mention of Samuel should have angered her, but instead, tears welled unexpectedly in her eyes. Tabitha turned away quickly, busying herself with putting away the medical supplies. Are you hungry? She asked, changing the subject. I have stew from earlier. That would be mighty kind, thank you. As Tabitha ladled stew into a bowl, Xavier sat quietly, respecting her space. The storm continued its assault outside, but inside, an unexpected calm began to settle between the widow and her unexpected guest. Over the simple meal, Xavier spoke of his travels 10 years of moving from ranch to ranch across the territories, working cattle, breaking horses, and occasionally serving as protection when needed. He talked of the places he'd seen, from the deserts of Arizona to the mountains of Montana, painting pictures with his words that momentarily transported Tabitha beyond her isolated existence. And what of you, Mrs. Morgan? He asked eventually. How did you come to be here? Tabitha found herself telling him about coming west with Samuel 5 years earlier, full of dreams about building something of their own. How they'd struggled through harsh winters and drought summers. How Samuel had finally struck a deal to sell their cattle to the Army outpost 60 miles east, only to catch pneumonia on the journey back. How quickly illness had taken him, leaving her with the half-built dream they'd started together. We never had children, she admitted quietly. Now I wonder if that was God's mercy. What would I do with little ones to care for alone? Xavier nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps they would have been your reason to persevere. He set his empty bowl aside. What will you do now? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. It was the same question she'd been asking herself every day since Samuel's death. I don't know, she admitted finally. The nearest town is 20 miles away. I have some savings, but not enough to start over somewhere else. This land is all I have. And it's good land, Xavier observed. Prime grazing territory from what I saw riding in. It is. Samuel chose well, but what good is good land to a woman alone? Xavier's gaze was steady. A capable woman can do more than most give credit for, but it doesn't mean you have to do it all alone. Before Tabitha could respond, a particularly violent gust of wind rocked the cabin and part of the roof gave way above the small bedroom. Rain poured in, soaking the bed and floor. Damn it! Tabitha jumped up, grabbing a bucket. Xavier was already moving, dragging the bed away from the worst of the leak. We need to get something up there now, or the whole roof might go. For the next hour, they worked together in frantic cooperation, Xavier climbing into the rafters to place a tarp, while Tabitha handed up tools and held the lantern. By the time they had temporarily sealed the roof, both were soaked and exhausted, but the immediate danger had passed. Tabitha sank into a chair, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. "I can't keep fighting this place," she whispered, more to herself than to Xavier. He knelt before her, his expression serious. "Mrs. Morgan, Tabitha, if I may. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't fighting alone, it's accepting help when it's offered." "And are you offering help, Mr. Jackson?" she asked, meeting his gaze directly. "I am, at least until the storm passes and your roof is properly fixed." Tabitha studied him, this stranger who had appeared like an answer to an unspoken prayer. "Why would you do that?" Xavier was quiet for a moment. "Because I've been riding alone for 10 years and I know what it does to a person. No one should face a storm like this by themselves." In that moment, with rain still drumming on the roof and wind howling outside, something shifted between them, an understanding, perhaps, or the foundation of trust. "You can stay until the storm passes," Tabitha agreed finally. "After that, we'll see." Morning brought cleared skies and a transformed landscape. Tabitha woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of hammering. She dressed quickly and emerged to find Xavier already at work on the roof, moving with the confidence of someone who knew his way around repairs. He tipped his hat when he saw her. "Hope I didn't wake you, Mrs. Morgan. Thought I'd get an early start." "You've been busy," she observed, noting not just the roof repairs but also the fixed shutters and the stack of newly chopped firewood beside the porch. "Just earning my keep." He climbed down from the roof. "Your property suffered some damage beyond the house. Fencing down in the south pasture and a tree fell near your well. I can see to those after I finish here if you'd like." Tabitha handed him a cup of coffee. "That's more than a day's work, Mr. Jackson." "Don't you need to be getting to Sweetwater?" Xavier accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. "Carson's not expecting me for another week. I can spare a few days to help get things right here." Tabitha wanted to refuse, to prove she could manage alone, but practicality won out. "I'd be grateful for the help, Mr. Jackson, but I insist on paying you fairly for your work." "We can discuss terms later," he replied easily. "For now, let's get that roof finished before the next rain comes." Over the next 3 days, Xavier and Tabitha fell into an unexpected rhythm. During the days, they worked side by side repairing storm damage and tackling maintenance jobs that had accumulated since Samuel's illness. Xavier showed Tabitha how to reinforce fence posts and mix mortar for the chimney stones that had come loose. She, in turn, shared her knowledge of the land where the best water sources were, which areas flooded in heavy rain, the shortcuts to neighboring properties. In the evenings, they shared meals and stories. Xavier spoke of his childhood in Missouri, his father's small farm, and his decision to head west after the war had taken both his parents and left the farm in ruins. Tabitha told him about growing up in Pennsylvania, meeting Samuel at a church social, and their shared dream of building something of their own away from the crowded East. On the 4th morning, Tabitha found Xavier studying Samuel's ledger books with a furrowed brow. "I hope you don't mind," he said when he noticed her watching him. "I was trying to get a sense of what you're working with here." Rather than feeling intruded upon, Tabitha was curious. "And what do you see?" Xavier ran a hand through his hair. "You've got good foundations." Samuel knew what he was doing with the cattle breeding. These bloodlines could fetch a premium if marketed right. But you need hands to work the place. At least 2 hired men during calving season, and you need to sell off some of the herd before winter to reduce your feed costs. He hesitated before adding, "And you need protection. A woman alone on a property like this, word gets around." Tabitha sighed, sitting across from him. "I know all of this, Mr. Jackson. What I don't know is how to solve it." Xavier closed the ledger, his expression thoughtful. "There are options. You could sell and move to town. You could try to find a foreman willing to work for a share of profits instead of wages. Or, Tabitha prompted when he didn't continue. Xavier met her eyes directly. Or you could consider a partnership. Tabitha's breath caught. A partnership with whom? With me. Xavier's voice was steady, his gaze unwavering. I've spent 10 years working other men's land, saving what I could. I know cattle, I know horses, and I'm not afraid of hard work. What I don't have is land of my own. Tabitha stared at him, speechless. This was far from what she had expected when she opened her door to him during the storm. Xavier continued into her silence. It would be a business arrangement, proper and above board. We'd draw up papers with the lawyer in Sweetwater. You'd maintain ownership of the land, but we'd split the profits from the operation. And where would you live? Tabitha asked, practical even in her surprise. I could fix up the old bunkhouse I saw out back, make it habitable. You'd maintain your privacy here in the main house. The proposition hung between them, full of possibilities and complications. Tabitha rose and moved to the window, looking out at the land she and Samuel had sacrificed so much for. This is unexpected, Mr. Jackson. I know it is. And I understand if you need time to consider it. Or if you want to refuse outright. He stood as well, maintaining a respectful distance. But I believe we could make this work, Mrs. Morgan. Your knowledge of the land and my experience with cattle could be a powerful combination. Tabitha turned back to face him. Why would you propose this? You were headed to a secure position at the Carson Ranch. Xavier's expression softened slightly. Because in 4 days, I've come to respect what you and your husband built here, because I see the potential of this land, and because... He paused, choosing his words carefully, because I've never felt as settled anywhere as I have helping you these past few days. The honesty in his voice was unmistakable, touching something within Tabitha that had been dormant since Samuel's death hope. I'll think about it, she said finally. That's all I can promise for now. Xavier nodded, accepting her response. That's all I ask. That evening, as Xavier repaired a broken chair on the porch, Tabitha found herself watching him from the window. There was something comforting about his presence, solid, capable, but never imposing. In just 4 days, he had transformed from a stranger seeking shelter to someone she trusted implicitly. Was that enough basis for a partnership? Or was she simply desperate to avoid facing her future alone? When Xavier came in for supper, there was a new tension between them, not unpleasant, but charged with unspoken possibilities. I've been thinking about your proposal, Tabitha said as they ate. I have questions. I'd be concerned if you didn't, Xavier replied with a small smile. What happens if it doesn't work? If we find we can't cooperate or have different visions for the ranch? Xavier set down his fork, giving her question the consideration it deserved. We'd include provisions for dissolution in our agreement. Perhaps a buyout option or a timeline for one of us to establish elsewhere if needed. Tabitha nodded, impressed by his forethought. And if either of us were to marry someday, how would that affect our arrangement? A flicker of something crossed Xavier's face, surprise, perhaps, or something deeper. That would depend on the circumstances. If you were to marry, your husband might want to take over operations. If I were to marry. He paused, his eyes meeting hers. Well, that would be a bridge to cross when we came to it. You've never married? Tabitha asked, realizing how little she knew of his personal life despite their days of conversation. No, Xavier's expression grew distant. Came close once, back in Missouri before the war. She married someone else while I was away fighting. He shrugged, the motion dismissing old pain. After that, the wandering life suited me better. Until now, Tabitha couldn't help asking. Xavier's gaze returned to her, steady and clear. Until now. The simple words carried weight, filling the space between them with unspoken implications. Tabitha felt her cheeks warm and busied herself with clearing the dishes. I should check on the horses before dark, Xavier said, standing and reaching for his hat. Take all the time you need to decide, Mrs. Morgan. I understand it's not a small thing I'm asking. After he left, Tabitha sat alone at the table, her mind working through the practicalities of his offer. A business partnership would solve many of her immediate problems, the lack of labor, the isolation, the vulnerability. But it would also mean adapting to a new presence in her life, learning to share decision-making for the land she and Samuel had dreamed of together. And what of the other feelings beginning to stir within her? The comfort she found in Xavier's presence, the way his smile eased the grief that had become her constant companion. Was that merely gratitude or something she should guard against? That night, as a gentle rain began to fall again, Tabitha found herself unable to sleep. She lit a lantern and went to Samuel's trunk, opening it for the first time since his death. Among his belongings, she found the letter he had dictated to the army doctor during his final days, his last words to her. "My beloved Tabitha," it read in the doctor's neat hand, "if you are reading this, I have failed in my promise to build our dream together. Forgive me for leaving you to carry on alone. Know that my greatest regret is not the dying, but the knowledge that you will face the harshness of our chosen life without me beside you. If God sends you another companion for your journey, do not let loyalty to a ghost keep you from embracing that blessing. All I ever wanted was your happiness. Live, my dear one. Live fully. With all my love, Samuel." Tears streamed down Tabitha's face as she read and reread the letter. It was as if Samuel had anticipated this very moment. This decision she now faced. Morning found Tabitha at the kitchen table, the agreement she had drafted laid out before her. When Xavier entered from outside, his hat in his hands, she gestured for him to join her. "I've been thinking about your proposal," she said without preamble. "I've written out terms I think would be fair to us both." She slid the paper toward him. "If you find them acceptable, we could take them to the lawyer in Sweetwater to make them official." Xavier read through her notes carefully, nodding occasionally. When he looked up, there was respect in his eyes. "These are fair terms, Mrs. Morgan, more than fair. If we're to be partners, Mr. Jackson, I think you should call me Tabitha." A smile warmed his features. "Tabitha, then." "And I'm Xavier to you." "There's one more condition," she added, her heart racing slightly. "Not written there, and what's that? Honesty, complete honesty between us always, no matter how difficult." Xavier nodded solemnly. "I can promise that, then I'll start." Tabitha took a deep breath. "I'm afraid, Xavier, not of you but of change, of letting someone new into the life Samuel and I built, of—" She hesitated, then continued, "of feeling something for someone who isn't my husband." Xavier's expression softened. "Tabitha, I would never rush you or expect anything beyond our business arrangement. Your husband was clearly a good man who loved you deeply. That deserves respect. He was, and he did." Tabitha's voice strengthened. "But he also wanted me to live fully, not just survive. He told me so in his last letter." She met Xavier's gaze directly. "I'm not ready for anything beyond a partnership now. I don't know when or if I will be, but I want the possibility to exist someday without guilt shadowing it." Xavier reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of hers, offering connection without demanding it. "Time has its own wisdom, Tabitha. I'm content to let it guide us in business and whatever else may come." Slowly, deliberately, Tabitha placed her hand in his. It was a simple touch, nothing more than a handshake to seal their agreement, but it felt momentous, the first step on an unexpected path. "Partners, then," she said softly. "Partners," Xavier agreed, his hand warm around hers. 3 weeks later, the Morgan Jackson Ranch saw its first cattle drive to the Army outpost. Xavier had insisted on keeping Samuel's name first in their business title, a gesture of respect that had meant more to Tabitha than she could express. Together, they had hired 2 local boys as hands and begun implementing the improvements Xavier had suggested. The work was exhausting but satisfying. Each evening, Tabitha and Xavier would sit on the porch, discussing the day's progress and planning for tomorrow. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in brilliant oranges and purples. It was during one such evening that Tabitha realized something had changed within her. The crushing weight of grief had lightened, making space for new feelings, pride in their accomplishments, hope for the future, and a growing affection for the man who had appeared in her life like an answer to an unspoken prayer. "I received a letter from Carson today," Xavier mentioned as they watched the stars emerge, wondering if I was still coming to take that position. Tabitha's heart constricted unexpectedly. "Oh, what did you tell him?" Xavier turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the last light of day. "That I've found where I belong." The simple statement carried volumes of meaning. Tabitha found herself smiling, truly smiling for the first time in months. "I'm glad," she said softly. As summer turned to autumn, the ranch flourished under their combined care. The bunkhouse Xavier had renovated remained his residence, but he took most meals with Tabitha in the main house. Their partnership expanded beyond business as they discovered shared interests, a love of reading that led to evenings spent with books by the fire, a mutual appreciation for music that prompted Xavier to unearth his harmonica, while Tabitha sang songs from her childhood. It was during the Harvest Festival in Sweetwater that something shifted between them. Tabitha had worn her best dress blue calico that brought out the warmth in her eyes. Xavier had stared when she emerged from the bedroom, his usual composure momentarily forgotten. "You look beautiful," he'd said simply. At the festival, as Xavier guided her through a dance, Tabitha felt the eyes of the community upon them, speculative, curious about the nature of their relationship. For the first time, she found she didn't care what others might think. The only opinion that mattered was that of the man whose hand rested respectfully at her waist, whose steps matched hers perfectly. "People are talking," she mentioned as they took a break near the refreshment table. Xavier handed her a cup of punch. "Does that bother you?" Tabitha considered the question honestly. "No," she replied, surprising herself with the realization. "No, it doesn't." The ride home was quiet, the wagon moving steadily through the moonlit landscape. When they reached the ranch, Xavier helped Tabitha down, his hands lingering slightly at her waist. "Thank you for a wonderful evening," he said, his voice low in the darkness. Tabitha looked up at him, at the face that had become so dear to her in such a short time. "Xavier," she began, uncertain how to express the feelings that had been growing within her. He waited, patient as always, allowing her the time she needed. Would you like to come in for coffee?" It was a simple invitation, but they both recognized it as a threshold being crossed. "I would," Xavier answered, his eyes never leaving hers. Inside, as Tabitha prepared the coffee, she felt Xavier's presence behind her, close but not touching, offering without demanding. "Tabitha," he said softly. When she turned to face him, the emotion in his eyes took her breath away. "I need to be honest with you as we promised each other." She nodded, her heart racing. "I came here seeking shelter from a storm, but I found so much more. I found purpose in our work together. I found friendship in our conversations." He paused, taking a careful breath. "And I found myself falling in love with a woman whose strength and grace humble me daily." Tabitha's eyes filled with tears, not of grief this time, but of an emotion she had thought lost to her forever. "I don't expect anything," Xavier continued. "I just needed you to know. Whatever happens next is your choice." Tabitha set down the coffee cups with trembling hands. "Samuel told me once that love isn't divided when shared again, it's multiplied." She moved closer to Xavier. "I will always love him. He was my first dream." "I would never ask you to forget him," Xavier said softly. "I know." Tabitha reached up, her hand gently touching Xavier's cheek. "That's one of the reasons I've fallen in love with you too." The words hung in the air between them, beautiful and terrifying in their honesty. Xavier's hand covered hers, holding it against his face. "May I kiss you, Tabitha Morgan?" he asked, his voice a whisper. In answer, Tabitha rose on her toes, closing the distance between them. Their first kiss was gentle, a question and an answer both, filled with promise and possibility. When they parted, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected to find a home again," he murmured. "Nor I," Tabitha replied, understanding perfectly what he meant. Home wasn't just the land or the buildings, it was the feeling of belonging, of being truly seen and accepted. As winter settled over the Wyoming Territory, the Morgan Jackson Ranch stood as a testament to unexpected beginnings. The widow who had sat alone in the storm had found not just shelter but a new purpose. The cowboy who had covered her had kept his promise of peace, bringing warmth back to a heart that had grown cold with grief. Their love story wasn't one of passionate youth or fairy tale romance. It was built on something more enduring: mutual respect, shared purpose, and the courage to begin again when life had dealt its hardest blows. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell gently outside, Xavier knelt before Tabitha in front of the hearth fire. The ring he offered was simple: a gold band with small engravings of prairie flowers. "I'm not asking you to forget what came before," he said, holding her gaze. "I'm asking if you'll allow me to walk beside you for whatever comes next." Tabitha looked at the man before her, the stranger who had appeared at her door during a storm and become the center of her world. She thought of Samuel and the life they had shared, the dreams they had built, and she thought of his final gift to her: permission to find joy again. "Yes," she whispered, her heart full. "Yes, I will." As Xavier slipped the ring onto her finger, Tabitha knew that some storms brought destruction, but others, the rarest kind, brought exactly what was needed to rebuild what had been broken. Their love had been born in a tempest, but would flourish in the clear skies that followed, stronger for having weathered the rain.